Hello and welcome to the Core Report, the special editions heading into 2024. So, digital transformation is a big and broad term. It's something that we've been hearing of for many years now in the context of how enterprises are trying to incorporate digital into the way they do business till it becomes business itself in many ways. The one thing that's changing and has changed is, of course, artificial intelligence. And there is a lot of curiosity in terms of how it is going to change the way business is done and how companies, more importantly, can use artificial intelligence. But that question in some ways comes a little later. The more important thing is to understand what are consumers asking, how are consumers behaving, and how is the relationship between businesses and the consumer, whether it's in products or services or elsewhere, changing. And what will 2024 hold for this relationship in specific and in general? So, to understand that, I'm pleased to be and delighted to be joined by Tony Saldanha, best-selling author, board advisor, Fortune 100 company consultant, who has worked in many places, but key amongst them being a 27-year career at Procter and Gamble, where he ran global business services and information technology for all of P&G's business units in 75 countries. Tony lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, the headquarters of Procter and Gamble, by the way, but has also worked in India, in Procter and Gamble and in Tata Unisys. So, Tony, thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us. And I, of course, must add that you've also written a book, Why Digital Transformations Fail. And that is an equally important book to understand, I guess, that not just the technology part, but the human side of things and where things go wrong or right. So, Tony, thank you very much for joining us. So, before we go into
My pleasure,
2024,
Govind.
before we go into 2024, tell us about what you've seen and taken away from 2023 in the context of transformation in the digital, obviously in the digital context.
So, Govind, 2023 has been in many ways a watershed year. This is where, technology has suddenly become a main stage element in the consumer goods industry and in consumer behavior itself. I would say that there are three patterns that became really very evident in 2023. The first one was around consumption. I think people finally are starting to demand much more personalized services. So, they're no longer happy with just a generic targeting, whether it is targeting for advertising or even targeting for products. The second thing, which really I do not need to say because everybody's experienced it, is the rise of AI. It's incredible that AI became mainstream. It was driven by a very specific use case of ChatGPT. But nevertheless, I think now you start to see AI as a way of targeting, as a way of product development, as a way of learning, as a way of operating the organizations. And then the third, I think, is 2023 was also the year where the environment suddenly once again had a tremendous jump in the in the consciousness, in the psyche, in the demands of the consumer. So I would call those out as the three big trends of 2023.
Right. So, can we pick a couple of them? You said targeting, product development, and learning. So, targeting is something that's obviously being practiced by corporations in the consumer goods space. Let's stick to that space perhaps for clarity for some years now. So, what's changed more recently in your understanding?
I think a couple of things have changed. I mean, honestly, when it comes to targeting, I would say that the biggest thing is really the awareness, the consciousness amongst large and medium and small sized companies of the power of technology. I mean, COVID really, step changed the digital awareness, for the average person, including the executives. And by the way, the reason I call that out is because about, 5 or 6 years ago, when I was writing my first book, Why Digital Transformations Fail, um, only about 20% of boards of directors were really, capable enough to even understand the power of technology and AI. Obviously, that jumped dramatically during COVID, and then it jumped even further when we came to last year with ChatGPT and things like that. So the first is awareness. The second actually is, I believe, the consumers themselves. I mean, the digital revolution is finally here. So, for example, in India, e-commerce is now 200 or going to reach 200 million, almost there. Next year, 2024. Um, Mobile penetration is going to be about 80% next year. So, I think you put the two together, the awareness of companies that this is a big deal, and of course, the adoption from the consumers. And that makes it a really potent force.
Right. So if you were to look at, let's say, I don't know what product categories that you would like to pick on, and you're free to choose, and see how, let's say, the companies or the enterprises are using technology or could use technology as we look ahead to better connect with consumers, to understand them, and to obviously deliver to them what they want.
So when it comes to consumer understanding and outreach, let's take the good old CPG business, right? So including Procter and Gamble, Unilever, and all of the other big names in India. I think there is a much better use of technology and understanding of technology to very quickly do consumer research, right? So the good old days of doing large numbers of studies and then waiting 3 or 4 months to get the data back and then analyze it, that was the traditional way of doing things. Now I think there is much more capability to not just do quick A/B testing, using algorithms online, consumer behavior data from other sources, but also reaching back into the archives of previously done studies, and then drawing quick inferences from the data that exists. So I think when it comes to understanding, there is much more prevalence of using those kind of techniques and technologies. But then I think the second is also reaching the consumers where they are. I mean, I'm not just talking about Facebook and Twitter, but I think the rise globally of Twitch and Be Real and to the extent that it is used in India, TikTok. I mean, I think all of these are becoming even more prevalent in targeting, reaching the consumers where they are.
Right, and I'll come to the TikTok. TikTok is of course banned in India, but to
Yes.
understand how it's being used in the United States or other markets would also be illustrative. Now, the you talked about going back and using past data or applying new algorithms on past data, and that sounds quite interesting. Are you saying marketeers are able to actually pull out fresh insights by looking at old data?
Oh, absolutely. Let me give you an example. Let's say that there was a study done, and there are a lot of these studies captured on video of, a consumer working in the kitchen, right? So, perhaps for dishwashing, perhaps for cleaning and so on and so forth. Now, AI recognition has gotten smart enough that it can now recognize actions and outcomes. So, for example, previously, maybe you shot a video to say, how frequently a person reaches for the bottle of, dishwashing liquid or soap, as the case may be, for cleaning. Um, but now you're able to kind of go back into that data, and you can actually see that every time the person is reaching or bending down into the closet, she is wincing in pain, right? And so that's an example of kind of new insights that you can get out of previous studies.
Interesting. And this is one kind of insight, but is there any other, let's say, large data set which is more broader in terms of, let's say, a regional preference for a certain product or some insight, or I mean, alternatively, maybe people have changed their view on something because they've looked at old data in a fresh way.
I think there are certainly examples of that happening. I think you can always get new insights out of existing data. Regional targeting, which is the example that you brought up, Govind, is always something that is a gift that keeps on giving, as I say. Um, the fact of the matter is that, previously companies were limited by processing power, how many insights, and how much they might be able to get out of existing data sets. So studies may have been done naturally, but the way they were tabulated were really limited by, the again, the capability of the technology to do this. I think when it comes to regional insights, what we're finding more and more is that now that you actually have the data, the limiting factor is really your imagination. You can go back and you can combine, for example, you can combine offtake data, in a particular state or in a particular part of the country. And then you can reach back into your original consumer understanding studies and see, why is it that the offtake, is not as much as you thought it was. So these are some of the areas, these are some of the use cases in which, AI is being used for more precise targeting.
Right, let's look at AI now as we look ahead. And as you mentioned, the obviously the first our first exposure to AI in its new form is large language models and the ability to communicate.
Yes.
AI in some form has obviously existed for some time already. But tell us about the new waves of AI, or the new kinds of AI. How companies, again in the consumer product space, for example, could be using it, and similarly, how could consumers be empowering themselves in coming months or years to either get better deals or get better products or services tailored for them?
So let me start with companies, including large consumer goods companies, on how they're using AI or how they could use AI. We talked about consumer understanding, so I'm going to stay away from that here now. Let's look at sales, right? The ability to do planogramming, product placements, on shelves. Again, previously that was limited by the fact that planograms were drawn manually or maybe on the computer, but they were human generated. Now you have the ability through AI to create targeted planograms, not just for a chain of stores, but specifically for stores themselves, right? So that's an example of how consumer goods companies are getting much, much better at, distribution and sales and availability based on AI. Of course, supply chain and the use of AI there. When I was at Procter and Gamble, one of the things that I did was actually finally use very different technology, not just the traditional SAP type of supply chain systems, but really starting to use AI and artificial intelligence algorithms, for the first time to do end to end, demand all the way through factory, replanning in real time. We actually took a product, a global Metamucil product, which is relatively simple, and we showed globally how we could quite literally replan in real time. I mean, that capability just simply does not exist, or did not exist until we kind of looked at that. So supply chain is another example. But, let's take something really, really trivial that, most people may not think of, which is the humble travel and expense report. Anytime in one of these companies, you go on a trip, you do the, hated travel and expense report, where are your receipts, how do you enter the system and stuff like that. Well, AI changes all of that, because now what companies can do, actually what companies are doing, Google is doing this, Adobe is doing this, is that you use data. So what you do is you say, all right, Govind, you want to do a trip from, Delhi to London. Go into the system, put in your, plans, 3-day trip, whatever it is. The system has all of the information of spending on travel, on, airlines, on food and stuff like that, and spits out, gives you a budget. At that time, your travel and expense process is done. You can use the company issued credit card, which will keep track of all of the expenses. And all of the data will do much more analytics than humans could ever on, the use of this. But then best of all, you are now free to, travel with whoever you want, stay with whoever you want, because you're driven by a budget, not necessarily by following the standard processes of I have to use this travel agency or I have to stay in these hotels. So as you can see, quite literally every function in these companies is dramatically being changed. And by the way, all of these are examples that I have done, at Procter and Gamble. So this is not conceptual. This is stuff that it is here today, right? From the second part of your question, which is what can consumers do? Can they get better deals? So, absolutely. I think, I saw a study that said that, consumers are finding more and more deals via social media today. And so they're looking less at traditional advertising. They're looking more at, either advertising that they see on social media or, for example, trends from influencers on social media. And so, that's one thing that is happening. Of course, the ability using AI to search more precisely for what you're looking for is there already. And that's another way I think consumers can get better deals.
Right. So from what you're saying, I can sense that there are two kinds of benefits. One is what's that's internal to the organization, and that itself is important because it makes the whole organization more efficient and responsive. And the second is the interaction with the consumer, including down to shop shelves or shelves at stores or department stores and so on. So between the two, in a broad sense, now, if I were to pose the CIO question, how is attention going to be divided in the coming year?
I think in the coming year, supply chain still continues to be the big priority. I think certainly in consumer goods organizations, manufacturing costs, the ability to source large amounts and large numbers of different materials, is a big, big, big cost driver. At the same time, as I was saying, at the macroeconomic trends, the environmental consciousness of consumers, where you need to be able to respond to consumers who are saying, how can I make sure that, 100% of all of the ingredients that went into this product was sustainably sourced? And so, without a doubt, I think supply chain is a priority.
And that's interesting because clearly in the last couple of years, and when I say couple, I literally mean 2 years or so, give or take, many companies are shifting around supply chains. Many started maybe around 2017 as tariffs went up in the United States. India, for example, is benefiting from some of those supply chain shifts, and we can see that with companies like Apple and Foxconn. So, what does this mean? And obviously, all of this has to be. The larger efficiency is physical, but what's the digital efficiency that is there, and how can it get better, or how will it get better?
I think this is, I'm going to narrow down on India and, the manufacturing plus technology sector as a competitive advantage for India. Govind, you and I know that India has been the digital factory of the world now for several years. I mean, it's not just the BPO, the programming work that's done out of India, but the fact that, everybody, from Google to Microsoft or whatever it is, a lot of the software that they produce for the rest of the world is actually done in India. Right? So India's always had a competitive advantage when it goes there. Now, the interesting trend in 2024 is combine that with the need of the West to move away from China and do much more manufacturing out of India, right? And as you correctly pointed out, one part of this is obviously the factories, the machines, the physical aspects, the Internet of Things, so on and so forth. But I think this is the big opportunity for India. This is an unprecedented opportunity, not just for the country, but anywhere in the world, which is to combine IT technical skills and supply chain skills for all types of processes, whether it is incredibly efficient planning, incredibly, high tech, high efficient capability machine running using Internet of Things and things like that, as well as, manufacturing planning, factory, shop layout, factory scheduling, so on and so forth. We can already see some of this starting to happen. Obviously, you mentioned the examples of, iPhone and Tartas and, so on and so forth. Um, but this is an opportunity not just for the big companies, but for the small sector of businesses that want to become the manufacturing factory of the world, literally. That's the positive opportunity that's ahead of us.
Right. And if just to spend some more time on the supply chain aspect. So, if you were to, let's say, in the coming year, so one is the physical factories moving and some will and others may not, because, let's say, being in China is still more competitive for various reasons. But where do you see the opportunity to, let's say, squeeze out more costs and or the efficiency? And how is that different from what it was, let's say, a couple of years ago? Because the reason many of these factories moved in the first place was precisely for those reasons.
Yes. So this the fourth industrial revolution, the use of Industry 4.0, which is really the blending of technology and manufacturing, is the big opportunity. Um, and I'm talking really now on execution, so not so much on the geopolitics and why are global manufacturers moving to India, or for example, even within India, why are they moving locations? So when it comes to Industry 4.0, the opportunity to improve both efficiency and effectiveness is almost unlimited, right? Plus, on top of that, the environment driven considerations. So, environment driven considerations are, not just, figuring out how to optimize the use of power or, water as a resource or, all of that kind of stuff. You put together the Internet of Things, you put together really, fine-tuned algorithms, and you can make a difference truly on carbon neutrality. Now let's take efficiency. For the most part, they have, at least on large manufacturing, there have been more sensors available on manufacturing machines than companies have ever used that data, right? And so now what we're starting to see for the first time is the ability to, use that information to improve availability of these machines, reduce downtimes, and so on and so forth. So that is a big, big driver. The other is then the logistics related stuff. The improvement, not just in the manufacturing side, but the ability, every truck that rolls in India today or anywhere in the world, um, undoubtedly has a driver with a cell phone. There is already an inbuilt Internet of Things that comes along with the truck. Do we use it, right? So that's an example where you can start to put together some of these signals and really make a big difference, both on efficiency and effectiveness.
Right. So, as we look ahead again, uh, what is the role, or what is the challenges? Are the challenges that you see for business leaders, whether in the consumer space or any other space, which is, let's say, B2B, supplying OEM suppliers to, let's say, automotive. I mean, it could be anywhere. But what are in the context of what we've spoken so far? How would you define the key challenges for business leaders? Maybe more so in the Indian context as you look ahead.
I started off our conversation, Govind, by saying that there is a large awareness amongst business leaders on the power of technology. Um, Specifically within India, I would say that that is spread unevenly. I do think that larger companies, whether they are multinational or more and more Indian owned companies that are very, very big, they're making much more use of technology and modern manufacturing, supply chain, Industry 4.0 techniques. I've had the opportunity in recent months to study a little more the medium and small-sized organizations, and I don't think the awareness and adoption of technology is quite keeping the same pace as the large companies. So, um, opportunity number one, I think, is still awareness and understanding. Maybe much more so in the small and medium enterprises where I fear that the digital divide is becoming bigger. But I also think that it exists even in the large companies in India, primarily driven by the age of, some of the assets, some of the machinery, and some of the technology that exists out there. So how do we transition very quickly, in line with the ambition to become quite literally the manufacturing and technology factory of the world? I think that's challenge number one. The second challenge, I think, is for executives in many of the CPG industries to keep up with the very quickly changing demands of the growing middle class. I mean, the middle class in India will be about 475 million in 2024, right? And these are 475 million that are very different than their counterparts even 2 years ago, in their habits, in their preferences. Their food habits have become much more international. Their delivery, or now actually how they get the food, food delivery habits, local food delivery at home is going to be up like 16% next year. So I think that's the second opportunity, which is consumer understanding, keeping up with a growing target audience, but a growing target audience that's not quite the same as who you were targeting yesterday, right? And then the third thing I think, which is going to be a challenge, is I believe the continual growth of the awareness and the demands from this consumer base on corporate and social responsibilities. Companies are going to be hard pressed to give real data on why they are better than their competition when it comes to CSR.
Interesting. Okay, let me sort of try and wind up now. Your book, Why Digital Transformations Fail, obviously talked about what goes wrong despite having the best of intentions. The best of intentions at this time, let's say, to even bring in all that you've just said, is to make your company internally efficient, make it more, let's say, focused on improving sourcing, supply chains, and driving efficiencies and costs there. Simultaneously trying to connect or reconnect with an ever-changing consumer and a middle-class consumer, the one, like as you defined right now. So the objectives are broadly clear. The path is fairly clear, but yet the transformation, if that's the right term to use here, process can fail. Why does that happen?
Govind, this is the $64 billion question, as they say. It fails for two reasons, very candidly. One is language and awareness of what are we trying to do. And the second is methodology, right? So let me penetrate both of those a little bit. So first, language and awareness. The terms digital transformation, business transformation, have become buzzwords. They have been co-opted by technology suppliers. Even if you're selling a payroll system, you say, transform your company, use payroll. So the reality is that, as an executive, context is incredibly important. We are in the fourth industrial revolution era. And unlike the first three industrial revolutions, which were, steam engine, electricity, and the internet, respectively, this fourth, digital, data, AI, eats all of the technologies. It's manufacturing physical technologies, it's social technology, it's medical technology. There is only one way to define transformation in this era, which is if you were successful in the third industrial revolution era, all the things that you have to change in order to be still successful in the fourth industrial revolution era. So one piece of software is not going to do it. One platform's not going to do it. It is going to have to be total shareholder returns that you deliver using new business models, using technology. Right? So that's issue number one. I think people define this too narrowly, too buzzwordy, and therefore they fail. The second is then the methodology. So if you follow the logic that I just said, it's not about technology alone or about processes alone. It's also 90% about culture change within your organization, upskilling, figuring out how to bring your organization along. And none of the transformation methodologies really address that adequately. It's more like an afterthought. So you put those together, and that's really why 70% of all digital transformations fail.
Right. Tony, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining me, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed that chat.